he's listening right now and trying to put something together. So,
oh, good.
Yeah.
Great.
So.
Well, Dave, this is Dave Riggs, and you've been really active. I'm going to get off the book thing just a little bit.
Sure. But
you are a really active Vietnam veteran supporter.
Yeah, pretty much. I like to think I'm a frequent flyer up at the VA Medical
Yes.
Center.
Yeah, you are.
But I'm there a lot, trying to take care of a lot of those.
And you do some
issues.
of the honor. What's that?
Yeah,
called?
I belong to the Patriot Guard Riders. We attend funerals for fallen soldiers, veterans, and so forth.
Guys, you don't know.
No, we don't know. I started doing it back in '06, and I've attended funerals in Washington, Arizona, Nevada, Texas, of course Utah, and so forth, and gone to about 200 or so funerals. And Howard, the guy I just spoke about, and Steve Smith are also Vietnam vets that happen to belong to the Patriot Guard Riders, and they will attend and hold flags at a flag line, or do a motorcycle escort for the veteran and his family to the cemetery.
Yeah.
So it's a very poignant moment.
So let's see, what would be the age of most of the Vietnam veterans at this point now?
Anywhere from 68 to 75.
Oh yeah.
In that.
68 to 75. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, these days it used to be you expected to be dead by 72. Nowadays, you're just getting going good at 72.
Well, yeah. Well, that's something to look forward to, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, anyway, Dave, I just wanted to say I know you do that, and I've seen reports of the whole thing on Facebook in one place and another, and I think that the community thanks you. On their behalf, I'm going to thank you. Right now.
Well, the Wasatch Wave actually won a couple of competitions for their front page or their Veterans Day layout, and there was a picture of Howard right on the front page holding a flag at a particular funeral.
Yeah.
We submitted to the Wasatch Wave, Lori Wynn, and it got printed. And I understand they won an award for that.
Yeah.
So we kind of feel good about that.
Well, the whole community, as we've said, really, I think they really support our Veterans Day ceremony thing that we had, even though it wasn't very well attended this past Veterans Day,
Yeah.
Memorial Day. I'm sorry, not Veterans Day, but Memorial Day. Still, it's a terrific thing, and so many people out there and a lot of support. So anyway,
We'd
thanks,
like to get
Dave.
the parade going too, the Swiss Days Parade, the Heber Parade, to get all the veterans we can on motorcycles and get them on in the parade lineup. So
Yeah.
and it's always fun to ride past you and
Yeah.
and wave and get you to say our name. So
And I like to take a lot of pictures too, so I've got photos of you guys.
oh yeah.
On your best behavior. Well, let's get back to the book thing that we've got coming up this Saturday. Bob Casey, I have a copy of your book, which I'm about halfway through maybe, and it's actually a second book.
Yes, it is. It's actually, I'm starting the third book. It's a trilogy. It started with an epic journey to the end of time, and which followed two souls throughout time, all the way from ancient Sumer to what we call the end of traditional time. The second book picks up where that last story ended. But you can also read the second book and I think still understand what's happening. There's both self-contained novels. They're written in prose form, which at first throws some people, but really it reads just like a traditional novel once you get into it.
You're right. You just have to give it a few pages, or a chapter maybe, or two, and then it actually becomes really fun, and I think it's more fun to read because of the way you've structured the whole thing.
Yeah, it's very concise, and I've had some nice comments, let's put it this way, from some individuals that have read the book, and it deals with an extremely important question: what's next? You know, we all have our spiritual, religious beliefs and so forth, and we believe in them strongly, but we sometimes wonder at that last moment what happens. Well, this is my attempt to sort of describe that.
Yeah, it'll make you think. Make you think about your.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Your vivid what's the word I'm looking for? Your vivid thoughts of what
Right.
might happen and how it might happen and so forth.
Well, you know, Bob too has a series of other books on poetry and some other works that he's had over the years. These are just his latest.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The latest. In fact, a lot of people call you Poet Bob.
Yeah, I sort of.
It's on his license plate.
It's on my license plate, so it helps publicize my work and so forth.
So, did the officer come up to the window and say, "Okay, I'd like to hear a little poetry about that"?
Well, I'm pleased that the recent police chief that was on doesn't know me.
We're all glad about that, aren't we? Where are you from originally, Bob?
Actually, from Ohio, a little town called Galion, Ohio, and just lived there much of my life. Then I was an educator moving through elementary, as an elementary teacher, then middle school teacher, then middle school principal, assistant superintendent, then superintendent. So I moved within the Ohio area for a few times. I was lucky enough to spend a year in New Zealand, which on what was called a Fulbright, and that was really a wonderful place to be. So.
Were you in Auckland? Where were you?
I was up in a town called Palmerston North, which was just north of Wellington by about 45 minutes. So, yeah, so it was a great experience, but it impacted what I tried to do with my with teaching and so forth.
And how did you happen to come to the Heber Valley?
Well,
it's a long way from Ohio.
I know. I'm not alone in this. The more people I talk to of Dave and our tender age, I discover it's the grandkids. Our sons.
That is really true, isn't it, Barry?
Yeah, our sons and our daughter-in-law gave us a personal invitation to come out, and we always were visiting, so we thought, shoot, when your daughter-in-law invites you, you're going to take advantage of it. So that's what we did. Yeah.
And you know, the other thing, it's sort of how you're going to keep them down on the farm once they've been to the Heber Valley kind of syndrome.
Right.
This is an awfully good place to be.
Yes, it is.
Even in this heat that you talked about earlier.
Yeah,
right? So,
that's exactly right. Well, let's move to David Riggs. Dave,
all right. Okay.
You've been here, I've known you for 5 or 6 years, I
Yeah,
guess.
we lived here for a while. Actually, we have sold our place in Midway and moved to the ocean on the western side of Washington State. Now, we still live in Utah County in Pleasant Grove, but I have an issue with altitude. So one of the things I had to do was look for a lower altitude.
You have an attitude with altitude?
Yeah, an attitude with altitude.
Wow.
But so sea level kind of popped up, and I thought, well, let's do that. But here again, the same problem Bob has. We have our kids here, so we have to stay in this area of Utah. So Pleasant Grove, where we have a condo, and Renata, my wife, her and I stay there, and we go back and forth. So it's kind of an interesting existence. But
yeah, boy, it sounds like. So how much are you trying to spend summers more in Washington, or?
Exactly. We're trying to spend as much time as we can, and it's doing me some physical good. So that's a good thing, because we're finding more and more people of our advanced age have a problem with the altitude here in the...
Your advanced age? Come on, give me a break.
In Tai Chi, we call it the springtime of life.
Well, yeah, I'm not springing around very much these days, but yeah, I tend to feel better at a lower altitude. So. And
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well.
So it's.
I know you can play your trumpet a lot louder at sea level.
That's right.
All the musicians that come up here, in fact, even Merle Haggard, the great Merle Haggard, I went to see him out in Wendover, and he was singing some song, and at the end of it, he said, "I'd like to remind you that song was written to be sung at sea level." Because people run out of air if they're not used to it. I guess a lot of us who've lived here for so long,
Oh, yeah, you get
really
used to it, I guess. Merle Haggard just passed away not too long ago.
Yes, he did. Yes, about this past year. In fact, that whole generation, Ray Price and all of them. I'm sure Willie Nelson's looking over his shoulder because so many of his friends that he's recorded with, have been buried in the last 4 or 5 years.
Now, you know most of these people, right?
Well, yeah.
I mean,
I don't really know them, but I've been around them.
You're the real celebrity. I mean, you're the one that's got that kind of a background.
So let's talk about your book now, David. What do you say?
Segue on us there?
I believe that's a segue.
Yeah.
Tell us about your book.
Well, I got 2 books. I'm working on a trilogy, on my 3rd part of the trilogy. Bob's working on the 3rd part of his. I've got one called Lord of Obstacles. It deals with a Iraq War veteran who's suffered a traumatic brain injury and trying to cope, move along through life and accomplish things and do some learning. The 2nd book picks up the same characters and moves them forward. Same types of issues. Now we're focusing more on Vietnam, and the backdrop is Utah. That's the.
Oh yeah.
It started out with the backdrop being in Washington State, up on the beach, but now it's down in Utah again. The 3rd one I'm still working on. I'm looking for that time off at the beach where I could just sit around and let it come and do it then.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I see it within the next 6 months to a year.
So when you start to write a book like this, do you start off with sort of an outline, or do you start with a goal in mind, the ending, and then figure out how to get to the story, or how does that work with you?
Well, I don't want to give away anything, but a lot of it's autobiographical.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything in both books has happened either to me, to somebody I know, or to somebody that was close to me over the years, and just kind of wove it together in a story that I hope is going in a tangible direction where people can understand. But it's going to take all 3 books to go together, but hopefully they can be read one at a time. And it's a little bit raw in some areas, but that's the way it is these days. I started out with a publisher, a traditional publisher on the 1st book. That was a terrible mistake. I found myself enslaved there, and I had no choice in anything. So I bought back the rights to the very 1st book and republished under CreateSpace.
Really?
Which is a self-publication. And Bob is kind of an expert at that. He's got his own company, Journeys Publishing, that helps people publish their works. So book publishing is a whole different world nowadays than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So
how interesting. See, we were just talking about those old guys, Waylon and Willie and boys, and they became the outlaws to escape the publishers, because the publishers in Nashville, the guys that were saying what we'll release and what you record and how it's done and whatnot, felt like apparently you did with your first publisher there, and they said, hey, we're leaving. We're going back to Texas.
Oh, yeah. And I know several of the local authors have had trouble with their initial publishers, to the point where the publishers try to make all the decisions, and they make a lot of wrong decisions, not to the benefit or the behalf of the author. So you have to go through extremes sometimes to republish under your different name or your own name somehow. You have to buy back your identity.
But you can keep the rights then to the book.
Oh yeah, you have to buy back your rights. Yeah. Because when you publish
when you publish it, you sell the rights to the book, and
yeah.
Yeah, it depends on who you go through, but a lot of companies do that, or they say they own it for 2-3 years, and then you can go with someone else. Many of the publishing companies are having real financial problems these days because the way many people start out, they get refused by a traditional publisher. They self-publish. They actually reap in much more money, and consequently, once they sell, supposedly the magic number is 1,000 books. If you self-publish and sell 1,000 books, then you're very marketable to one of the bigger companies.
Yeah, right.
Similar thing happened to me back in the 80s. I wrote a screenplay for a horror film that got produced. It was a premiere, the whole thing. It starred a whole bunch of great people. Aldo Ray, if you remember, Alan Hale Jr.,
yeah, really?
Cameron Mitchell, John Ireland.
No kidding.
They were the stars.
You wrote the screenplay?
I wrote the original screenplay, and once I was paid for it, I was kissed goodbye, and that was the end of my involvement. And then they they turned it into an abomination. The movie is something I would never recommend people to buy. But it's one of those things. The movie was called Terror Night. That was the working title. And then it was eventually changed to Bloody Movie, which it was, because it was a slasher film. And yeah, it was just one of those things that it was a little disappointing to see what they did. You know, look what they've done to my song. You know,
but I enjoyed the movie, Dave.
Well, there's probably dozens of people out there who would.
It became sort of a cult film, didn't it?
It did, actually. In fact, I got a letter from an Italian film critic and author who's writing a book about the production of this movie. So he interviewed me, on via email, and the book's going to come out, and they're going to talk about all the ins and outs. It was originally to be directed by Andre de Toth, who was Veronica Lake's husband. This goes way back, of course. So it was all very interesting, and it was a lot of intrigue going on behind the scenes, and there was a mafia connection, and there was all kinds of things that the Godfather 2 movie that everybody was trying to write a script for back in the 70s. This guy, the producer, had submitted a script, and it was originally accepted, and then he was thrown out. They gave him a big bunch of money, so he decided to make his own movies, and that's where I came in. So,
my goodness.
And let me tell you, I hate to see this guy move because he was my movie buddy. We'd go every week to see a movie, and he could tell me story after story because he knew so many of these people.
Now, where did you live? How were you able to be involved in that?
At the time, I lived and worked in Southern California, in Hollywood, actually, North Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I went to school at Cal State Fullerton and took some classes in script writing. And I had some friends who were into it, and we finagled our way up into a mansion up in the Hollywood Hills, pitched the script. We're told, how to go about it. We did it. It took me 3 days to type it out. And
this sounds like a book in itself, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. It was kind of an interesting thing, but I didn't give up my day job at the time either. So it was a busy time.
So how did you get into writing in the first place? Were you an English major or literally?
I've always just been interested in it. I started writing poetry in Vietnam and stories and and that sort of thing.
Yeah. What did you do in Vietnam? What was your job?
I was what's called a 05H20. It was a high-speed Morse code interceptor. It's a fancy name for a radio operator. I was with the Army Security Agency with the 1st Infantry Division. Served in Ben Hoa, Lai Khe, Minh Thanh. We used to move around and set up radio camps so we could do direction find on the enemy and call in airstrikes and all this stuff. So.
You're going to be a great guest at one of these Veterans Day programs on Memorial Day, because we've heard some wonderful stories. Cal Giles and Gene Probst, two of the World War II veterans, telling of their experiences. Now we're beginning to get the stories from the Vietnam vets, and I bet you have some interesting stories to tell.
KUED on TV has the Vietnam War stories. And if you ever watch that, they replay it several times a year. It's kind of
I bet you could get that on a PBS app.
Yeah, you probably could. And it's got different veterans giving their accounts of what they did, how they did it, and so forth. Anyway, there's several friends of mine on there that several have passed away.
Yeah.
One fellow, we actually got to do his funeral because he contracted Agent Orange and came down with a rare form of cancer that isn't so rare anymore. So
right.
Because of that. So, but yeah, he was able to tell his story, and but that was a couple of years ago now.
If we have the opportunity, maybe when Veterans Day comes around, if you're around, I'd love to have you come and we'll spend some time, talking about that.
Oh,
I had
sure.
Ken McConnell in last year.